I'm Carmine Gallo here with Guy Kawasaki, author of the new book Wise Guy. Look at you, the perfect cover. You're always smiling. You know, I was trying to think of a title for you, and you don't make it easy. I could easily say you're the Apple evangelist for Macintosh under Steve Jobs, author of 15 books, social media influencer, that's valid, high-tech
not like Kim Kardashian, but yeah.
Close. High-tech CEO, venture capitalist, brand ambassador for Mercedes-Benz, and now chief evangelist for Canva, which is online graphic design. What title should I use?
Single-handedly, I'm keeping LinkedIn afloat.
So tell me,
and you forgot some. You forgot father, husband, surfer.
Oh, the important stuff. That's right. Yes. I like the way this book is structured because it's got stories from your life and then it's followed by a lesson or a nugget of wisdom. So why don't we start there? Let's talk about storytelling, which is a passion of mine and a topic that I've been writing about a lot. In Wise Guy, you write, tell stories.
Yes.
Always tell stories. Use them to illustrate your key points. Stories are 10 times more powerful than adjectives.
Yes.
Okay.
What the hell?
Tell me what that means. Tell me what that means. You revolutionary, cutting-edge entrepreneur.
Yeah, right. Oh, adjectives. So one of the hats I've worn is a venture capitalist, and so I was constantly pitched, and I noticed something that. Basically, every entrepreneur, more or less, says, I have patent-pending, curve-jumping, paradigm-shifting, highly scalable, enterprise-class product that's easy to use and well-documented. Like, every friggin' one of them says that. And so I finally figured out that, unless you're saying something different from the competition, you are basically saying nothing. So no CEO gets up on a stage and says, I have a piece of crap that's hard, buggy, can't scale, and won't fulfill your greatest fantasies. So everybody says the same thing. So my thought is you should tell a story of two guys in a garage that were frustrated that they couldn't use a computer unless they work for HP or NASA or Stanford, and they thought, why can't there be a easy, cheap, small personal computer? So they started Apple. And I think those kinds of stories are much more powerful, much more memorable than the patent-pending, curve-jumping, paradigm-shifting crap that we hear.
Yeah, because it's not a differentiator anymore.
It's not.
And stories illuminate and inform and touch you in a much more meaningful way because we're wired for stories. Yeah, I like personal stories, and I like stories of real customers and real people. Often I'll meet executives or companies or brands that have good stories. Yes. They don't use it's almost like a missed opportunity.
Because they rather use adjectives. Because their PR flack and their personal entourage just say, you should say that we're patent pending, curve jumping, paradigm shifting, like nobody else is that. And they're just wrong. I mean, the great presenters, the great speakers are the great storytellers.
I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, in my opinion, your former boss, your first great boss, Steve Jobs, was the greatest business storyteller of all time. Would you agree?
I would agree with that. And, that's what made him so, well, many things made him great, but that's one factor that made him great.
Let's talk about talking. Public speaking. Yeah. Since 1987, you've become a global public speaker. You've given about 2,000 speeches in that time, probably more.
I gave one speech 2,000
times. Yeah. Do you believe, as I do, that today public speaking is a skill that is a fundamental skill that you should build as a way of standing out in the marketplace?
Sure. I mean, it is an essential skill, and the higher you go, the more important it is. Of course, there's also catch-22, is if you could speak publicly, you could go higher, and if you go higher, you need to publicly speak. So
why? Explain that.
Because how else do you convince the world? How else do you change the world, dent the universe? I mean, how else do you influence and persuade, change people's hearts, minds, and actions? It's not going to be because of your text message. Although, with social media, arguably social media, I would say that people who are good at social media are also good at speaking, and vice versa. It's hard to imagine, someone who's like a riveting public speaker would have a crappy social media presence. if he or she did it himself or herself. The two are sort of opposite sides of the same coin. And I think, well, in my warped perspective of the world, there are two fundamental skills, which is making and selling.
Yeah.
And so if you're a great maker, then you should partner with a great seller and vice versa. But fundamentally, if you can't make or sell, you're doomed.
Got it.
If you can make, then find someone who can sell, i.e., Woz finds Jobs.
Perfect.
And if you can sell, you need to find a maker, because what are you going to sell if you can't make it, i.e., Jobs and Woz? So at the end of the day, I think life for almost everybody is selling.
On the subject of public speaking and presentation specifically, I want to ask you about something in your book you say is critical. I agree.
Yeah.
You recommend make the type size on slides bigger. Steve Jobs used 190-point text.
Yes.
Explain that to
Yeah.
people. Why is bigger text a better slide, better presentation?
Well, there's some very simple reasons, such as bigger text is easier to read. Duh. Okay? But that's just one factor. The more strategic factor is, if you force yourself to use bigger text, you force yourself to put fewer words on the slide, because it's math. There's no room, right? So I think the fewer words on a slide, the better it is. And Steve used many slides with one word. And so now one might ask, well, why is it that fewer words is better than more words? And I think it's because the presentation part of your speech should be sort of an anchor and should be a summary of the point, right? So, but you don't want your audience to be looking at, like, they're looking, let's say you're there, right? And your slides are there, and they're all looking at the slide, reading your freaking 8-point paragraph, wondering what the hell you're talking about. And by definition, if they're looking there, they're not looking there. Mm-hmm. So what you want is, like, if I were presenting Canva, my slide would have 2 words: democratize design. Now, how long does it take to read democratize design? It's instant. So, democratize design. Back to guy. I want them on me, not on the presentation. And that's what Steve Jobs did very well.
Finally, let's close with the most influential boss you've ever had, Steve Jobs.
Yes.
I love this quote. In many ways, I am who I am and where I am because of Steve Jobs and Apple.
Yes.
Is there one lesson, I know there are many, but is there one lesson that all leaders, all aspiring leaders, entrepreneurs can take away from what you learned under Steve Jobs?
If I were to literally answer your question, which was, is there one lesson? The answer is no, because there's many more than one lesson. Yeah. But I don't think that's the spirit in which you asked the question. Mm-hmm. So are you forcing me to limit it to one, or do you want multiple?
You can tell us
are we
whatever,
running out of SD card space? Or?
You can tell us whatever you think would be important.
Okay.
From that time.
Okay,
I want to know, in many ways, I am who I am because of Steve Jobs. Why do you say that?
Well, because he launched my career. I mean, I'm living proof that if you do one thing right in your career, you can coast for a long time. So from Steve Jobs, what did I learn? Number one, I learned that customers cannot tell you how to revolutionize a product. They'll tell you what they want in terms of what they already are getting from you. So if you ask an Apple customer in the mid-'80s, what do you want? Bigger, faster, cheaper Apple II. Nobody said Macintosh.
They never would have said that Macintosh. Right?
Never. I mean, if you were Kodak and you said, what do you want? They would say, well, we want faster film with deeper colors. Nobody would have told Kodak, we want to stop using film and go digital. Even though the great irony is that Kodak engineer in 1975 invented digital photography. So what I learned from Steve is you can ask your current customer, how do I make and evolve what you're already getting from me better? But can you ask a customer, how do I jump to the next curve? and expect a reasonable answer that is useful, I don't think so. I learned that from Steve. Another thing I learned from Steve is you should hire people who are better than you. That when you look around the room, it should be a source of pride that, wow, the person I hired for engineering is better at engineering than me. The person I hired for finance is better at finance than me. And the person I hired for evangelism is better at evangelizing than me. Because if you look around the room, you say, I'm better than that guy in engineering who's running engineering. I'm better than that person in finance, and she's running finance. I'm better than that person in manufacturing, and she's running manufacturing. You suck. I mean, basically, you're saying that you're the best person in the room. You're an idiot. I mean,
could Steve acknowledge that? Could he acknowledge that Guy Kawasaki is better at me than evangelizing?
Well, I didn't say that was me, but I can't tell you I have a memory of him ever saying that you are better than me.
Yeah. But always hire people who who attain that level of excellence.
Or at least equal, but certainly not less. Yeah. And I think there are many people in the world who try to hire people who are not as good as them because they want to be the big dog. I will also say another lesson I learned from Steve, and this is back in the mid-'80s, that many of his direct reports were women already. So one thing I learned from Steve is it's a meritocracy. I mean, he didn't care about your gender, sexual orientation, educational background, religion, any of that stuff. You either were good or not. He was very binary. You were a 1 or a 0. And if you were a 1, he didn't care what your background was, and if you were a 0, he didn't care what your background was.
And what's fascinating, I read that part in your book, and what's fascinating is by looking at that, he actually had a very diverse team.
He did. I mean, this is way before. He was ahead of his time. Yeah.
And what I learned from Steve, obviously, remotely, is the ability to give a more inspiring presentation, communication, because he didn't, like you said in the book, Steve Jobs never sold features and speeds and feeds and products. He sold the meaning behind it, the purpose behind it. And I don't think a lot of leaders today still get that message.
Another thing that people don't realize about Steve, they look at Steve and you say, wow, he's such a natural, which he was, right? He was total natural. But he really was diligent. I mean, he practiced and he went over stuff and he drove people crazy. So it's not like he was so good that he just said, okay, I'll just show up at 5 minutes to 9 and go on at 9 and I'm done. He drove people crazy for weeks preparing. And that's something that when you see a great natural athlete, performer, whatever, you think, oh, it must be so easy for them. But it's not true. I mean, the way you make something look easy is because you prep. Not because you're just natural and you just show up. If someone is reading your books and watching your videos and is saying, I don't need Carmine's advice. That's for the great unwashed masses. That's for the hoi polloi. I can rise to the occasion. That's the person that most needs your help.
So many great lessons from Steve Jobs in this book, and that's why they call it Why. This was a great title.
I wanted to call the book, believe it or not, Are You Jackie Chan?
Are you kidding?
Seriously, that was the book. And there's a story in there, but I have to explain it. So one day, I had a Porsche at the time. I was in 911 Cabriolet. I look to my left. I see this car with 4 teenage girls making contact with my eyes and all that, laughing, giggling. And I thought, I've truly arrived. Everybody knows who I am. Apple, Garage.com, author, speaker. Girl in the front seat says, roll down your window. I roll down the window. She says, are you Jackie Chan? So that's kind of, leveling. But there's something even better about that story, which is, I tell you, there's a part of me that since that day, my goal is that someday Jackie Chan is in his Bentley or is his Mercedes, I hope, in Hong Kong, pulls up to a stoplight, girl in the car next door rolls down her window, asks Jackie to roll down his window, and says to Jackie, are you Guy Kawasaki? That's the goal.
That would be a great experience. That would be another story for another book, too. Yeah. So thank you, Guy. Appreciate it. Awesome. Great stuff.